The rain fell in a cold, relentless sheet, mingling with the silent tears tracing paths down Rebecca Morgan's cheeks. Cincinnati's historic Spring Grove Cemetery stretched around her, a landscape of marble angels and stone monuments disappearing into the mist. She stood alone under a borrowed black umbrella, the scent of wet earth and lilies thick in the air, a funeral perfume that seemed to seep into her bones. Her father was gone. The last handful of dirt had been tossed. The mourners had retreated to their cars, murmuring empty promises to stay in touch. Only Rebecca remained, her slender frame motionless before the fresh grave. The headstone was simple: Thomas Morgan, beloved father and artist, 1950 to 2023. It revealed nothing of the man who had filled their home with laughter and canvas, who had taught her to see beauty in shadows and hope in empty spaces. "Loneliness isn't having no one beside you," whispered a voice in Rebecca's mind. It was something her father used to say. "Loneliness is having the whole world around you, but no one who truly sees you." She touched the vintage pocket watch in her coat, her grandfather's timepiece, the only inheritance he had passed down, the same watch that had inspired her father's artistic journey. 3 generations connected by a love of beauty and time that never seemed to align with the practical world. 3 days later, in the quiet, dusty office of her family's lawyer, the second wave of devastation hit. Mr. Winters, who had handled the Morgan family's modest affairs for decades, removed his glasses and rubbed the bridge of his nose, his expression heavy with a gentle, weary pity. "I'm afraid the news isn't good, Rebecca. Your father left behind considerable debt." She sat perfectly still, her hands folded in her lap as Mr. Winters detailed the grim arithmetic of her inheritance, medical bills from her father's long battle with cancer, loans taken out to keep his failing gallery afloat, mortgages refinanced in desperate attempts to preserve both home and dream. "The bank will be foreclosing on the house," the lawyer said, his voice softening as he delivered the final blow. "I'm so sorry. You have 30 days. The house, the only home she had ever known. The Victorian beauty in Cincinnati's historic Walnut Hills district, where every corner, every creaking floorboard, every sun-dappled window held a memory. The garden her mother had planted before her car accident 15 years ago. The studio where her father had created hundreds of paintings that the art world had largely ignored. It was all she had left of them. "There must be something," she whispered, her voice breaking. "Some way." Mr. Winters shook his head sadly. "The paintings might fetch something, but nowhere near enough to cover the debt. If you sold them all, perhaps you could secure a small apartment." The mere thought made her physically ill. Sell her father's work, the pieces of his soul captured on canvas. The promise she'd made at his bedside still echoed in her mind. "I'll keep them safe, Dad. I'll keep your vision alive." Rebecca stepped out of the lawyer's office into the autumn chill, the world spinning around her. She had a job as an assistant curator at the small but respected Oakwood Gallery, but her modest salary barely covered her basic needs, let alone the mountain of debt her father had accumulated. Walking through the historic district toward home, she passed grand houses being renovated by wealthy professionals, the old neighborhood transforming block by block. Her father had watched this gentrification with mixed emotions, appreciating the preservation of architectural beauty while mourning the displacement of families who had lived there for generations. Sometimes he would say, "To save the past, you must sacrifice the future." But the price before her now seemed unbearably steep. Inside her house, Rebecca moved through rooms filled with paintings, memories, and now cardboard boxes. She had begun the impossible task of packing, though each item placed in a box felt like a small betrayal. In the living room, she hung her father's final painting, a landscape suffused with light, breaking through storm clouds, completed just weeks before his death. Standing before it, she whispered the promise again: "I'll keep them safe." 2 days later, a knock echoed through the quiet, half-packed house. Rebecca opened the door to find a man who seemed entirely out of place in her world of cardboard boxes and quiet grief. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", dressed in a suit so sharp and perfectly tailored, it looked like armor charcoal gray Tom Ford, if her gallery experience served her correctly. His overcoat was impeccable, unblemished by the light drizzle falling outside. A Patek Philippe watch gleamed discreetly at his wrist. But it was his face that arrested her, handsome, in a severe way, with high cheekbones and a strong jaw, dark hair trimmed with mathematical precision, and eyes that were an unusual shade of gray-blue, the color of a winter lake. Those eyes assessed her with a cool, unnerving detachment. She knew who he was, of course. Anyone in Cincinnati who read the business section or followed high-profile court cases would recognize Jonathan Blackwell, principal partner at Blackwell and Associates, a legal titan known for corporate cases, ruthless efficiency, and for never ever losing. He did not offer condolences. He did not engage in small talk. His presence filled the doorway, radiating a cold, intimidating power that seemed to push the air from her lungs. "Miss Morgan," he said, his voice a low, smooth baritone, completely devoid of emotion. "I understand you are in a difficult position." She stared at him, a mixture of confusion and resentment bubbling up. What could he possibly want with her? Was he representing the bank? Had they already sent their attack dog to hurry her eviction? "If you're here to offer legal services, Mr. Blackwell, I can't afford you." The words came out sharper than she'd intended, edged with the frustration of her circumstances. A flicker of something not amusement but cold calculation passed through his eyes. "I'm not here to offer my services, he said. "I'm here to make a proposal." He stepped inside uninvited, his gaze sweeping over the boxes, the paintings, the quiet desperation of the room. Water droplets fell from his coat onto her hardwood floor, each one making a perfect dark circle. "I will settle every cent of your father's debt," he stated. The words so direct, so shocking, they hung in the air between them. "I will save this house. You will lose nothing." The offer was a sudden, blinding light in her darkness, a lifeline she couldn't comprehend. Hope, sharp and painful, pierced through her grief. "Why," she whispered, her voice trembling, "why would you do that?" He turned his full, intense gaze on her. Something in his expression made her heart stutter, a predatory focus that reminded her of documentaries about wolves she'd watched as a child. "In exchange," he said, his voice dropping, becoming a quiet, devastating command, "you will marry me." The world tilted, the air rushed from her lungs. She stared at him, at this powerful, handsome stranger who had just offered her salvation at the price of her own life. She was about to scream, to laugh, to slam the door in his face. Why, she managed to choke out the word, a raw plea for reason, in a world that had just stopped making sense. He looked at her, his eyes as cold and impenetrable as a vault. "That is not your concern." He paused, letting the silence stretch, letting her desperation build. "But there is one condition." The words hung in the air, a silent, suffocating weight. "One condition beyond the marriage itself, a condition to the condition." Rebecca stared at him, her mind reeling, her initial shock giving way to a defiant, protective anger. "What condition?" she asked, her voice sharp, suspicious. Jonathan didn't flinch. He remained a statue of cool, controlled power, his face unreadable. He began to outline the terms of their contract with the same detached precision he would use in a courtroom. "It will be a marriage in name only," he explained, his voice a low, even monotone. "A partnership for a period of 6 months. You will move into my penthouse at the Ascent. We will attend a handful of essential corporate and social events together. In public, we will present a united front." He paused, his gaze sweeping over her. "In private, we will live entirely separate lives." The contrast between the public performance and the private reality was a chasm. She would be his wife, but also a stranger under his roof. "And the condition," she pressed, needing to know the final terrible price of her salvation. He took a step closer, and the clean, sharp scent of his expensive aftershave, something woody like cedar and cold air, filled her senses. It was a scent of power, of a world she didn't belong to. "The condition is this," he said, his voice dropping, becoming a quiet, intense whisper that was more intimidating than any shout. "There will be no emotional involvement, no sentiment, no romance." He paused, his eyes locking onto hers, the command absolute. "And above all, no intimacy. We are business partners, Miss Morgan, nothing more. If you break this rule, if any emotional or physical line is crossed, our agreement is terminated. The debts will be reinstated. You will lose this house. You will lose everything." It was the most monstrous, inhuman, and diabolical clause she could have ever imagined. He wasn't just demanding a fake marriage. He was demanding a marriage devoid of all humanity, all warmth, all connection. He was demanding that she sell her life, but not her heart or her body. It was a prison of cold, hard rules. She looked at his handsome, unyielding face and felt a wave of pure, unadulterated hatred. But then the image of her father's face, the memory of his love for this house, the terror of being left with absolutely nothing washed over her. She was trapped. She had no other move to make. Her eyes moved to the final painting, the light breaking through storm clouds. What would her father say if he could see this moment? Would he tell her to protect his legacy at any cost? Or would he tell her that no house, no painting was worth the price of her freedom? With a tear of silent, bitter humiliation tracing a path down her cheek, she whispered the two words that would seal her fate. I accept. Jonathan showed no emotion, no triumph, no satisfaction. He simply gave a curt professional nod, as if they had just agreed on the time of a meeting. He placed a thick leather-bound folder on a stack of boxes. The contract, he said. My legal team has been thorough. Read it. He turned to leave, pausing at the door without looking back. My driver will be here to collect you tomorrow morning at 9. Be ready. He walked out the door without a backward glance, leaving her alone in the quiet, half-packed house, with the cold, heavy weight of the contract that would sell the next 6 months of her life to a man who demanded everything from her, except her heart. Rebecca spent the night reading the contract line by line, her art history degree, no match for the dense legalese, but her determination unfaltering. Every clause confirmed what Jonathan had stated: a 6-month marriage, all debts settled, the house secured in her name, and the absolute prohibition of any emotional or physical involvement. At dawn, she stood in her father's studio one last time, touching his brushes, inhaling the lingering scent of oil paints and turpentine. She carefully packed a few essential paintings, most precious among them, his final work. Everything else would remain in the house, protected but vacant, like a museum to a life that had ended too soon. At precisely 9 the next morning, a sleek black Audi pulled up to her house. The driver, a solemn man in his 50s, loaded her 2 suitcases and the carefully wrapped paintings into the trunk. Rebecca locked the door with trembling hands, feeling as though she were locking away more than just a house. The drive took them across the Ohio River to Covington, Kentucky, where the Ascent stood, a dramatic 22-story condominium tower with a distinctive blue glass curved facade rising like a wave against the Cincinnati skyline. It was one of the most exclusive addresses in the area, a statement of wealth and position. The private elevator opened directly into Jonathan's penthouse, and the space that greeted her took her breath away, not with warmth or beauty, but with its stark, pristine emptiness. It was a vast 2-story apartment of glass, steel, and polished concrete, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the entire Cincinnati skyline and the river below. The furnishings were minimal and modern, all clean lines and neutral tones. There were no photographs on the walls, no books on the shelves that weren't law references or business biographies, no sign that a human being with passions or memories actually lived there. It was the fortress of a man who refused to feel. She was greeted not by Jonathan, but by an older woman with silver hair pulled into an immaculate bun. She wore a simple but elegant black dress and stood with perfect posture despite her 70 years. Welcome, Mrs. Blackwell, she said, the name sounding foreign and absurd to Rebecca's ears. I am Francis, Mr. Blackwell's housekeeper. I've prepared the guest suite for you. Rebecca followed Francis through the apartment, noting the perfect symmetry of the furniture, the absence of a single speck of dust, and the complete lack of anything personal except for one anomaly that caught her eye: a beautiful antique Steinway grand piano in a corner by the windows, its gleaming ebony surface reflecting the city lights. It seemed strangely out of place in this ultra-modern space, like a relic from another life. Does Mr. Blackwell play? She asked, gesturing toward the piano. Francis's expression remained neutral. Not anymore, she said simply, then continued walking. The guest suite was a self-contained apartment within the penthouse bedroom-bathroom and a small sitting area, all decorated in the same minimalist aesthetic as the rest of the space. The windows offered the same spectacular view, but the glass was tinted for privacy. Mr. Blackwell has asked me to review the house rules with you, Francis said, handing Rebecca a printed sheet of paper. The rules were extensive and precise. No personal items in the common areas, no changes to the decor or furnishings, no visitors without prior approval, no entering Jonathan's home office or bedroom wing under any circumstances. Meals would be taken separately unless otherwise arranged for social obligations. All movements outside the penthouse should be communicated in advance. Is there anything else? Rebecca asked, unable to keep a hint of bitterness from her voice. Francis's expression softened slightly, the first crack in her professional demeanor. Mr. Blackwell rises at 5 for his morning run. He's gone by 5:30 and returns by 6:30. He has breakfast at 7 and leaves for the office by 8. He rarely returns before 8 in the evening. Sundays are the only days he remains at home, usually working in his office. The message was clear. Here was the blueprint for avoiding him completely. "Thank you, Francis," Rebecca said, suddenly exhausted by the reality of her new life. "Dinner will be at 7, the housekeeper added. "Mr. Blackwell has a meeting tonight, so you'll be dining alone. Is there anything you don't eat?" Rebecca shook her head and Francis nodded before leaving her alone in the beautiful, soulless room. Rebecca spent the afternoon unpacking, carefully placing her father's painting on the wall where she could see it from the bed, a splash of color and emotion in the monochromatic space. She arranged her modest wardrobe in the enormous closet designed for a collection 10 times its size, her few possessions looking orphaned and inadequate in the luxurious surroundings. From her window, she watched the sun set over the city, painting the sky in fiery oranges and deep purples. Below, the Ohio River flowed steadily indifferent to the dramas played out on its shores. Somewhere across that river was her home, preserved but empty. Somewhere beyond that was the life she had known, now as inaccessible as a distant shore. The next morning, Rebecca woke before dawn, disoriented by the unfamiliar space. Unable to sleep, she wrapped herself in a robe and ventured into the main living area, drawn to the wall of windows and the city slowly awakening below. The soft pre-dawn light filtered through the glass, casting long shadows across the polished floor. She moved silently toward the piano, running her fingertips lightly over its closed lid, wondering about the story behind it. "I wouldn't touch that if I were you." The voice behind her made her jump. Jonathan stood at the entrance to the kitchen area, dressed in running clothes, black compression shirt, shorts, and expensive running shoes. His hair was slightly damp with sweat, his expression cold. "I was just looking," Rebecca said, withdrawing her hand quickly. "Looking often leads to touching," he replied, "and touching leads to changing. Nothing changes in this apartment." The double meaning in his words was unmistakable, a reminder of their agreement, a reinforcement of the walls between them. "I understand the rules, Mr. Blackwell," she said, emphasizing his formal name. "Jonathan," he corrected. "In private, you may call me Jonathan. In public, you are my wife and will address me appropriately." He moved to the kitchen, his movements precise and economical as he filled a glass with water. "Francis has scheduled you for fittings this afternoon," he continued without looking at her. "My clients expect a certain appearance from my wife. Your current wardrobe is inadequate." Rebecca felt heat rise to her cheeks, both embarrassment and anger flushing her skin. "I didn't realize I would be playing dress-up doll as well as trophy wife." For the first time, something like surprise flickered across his face. Perhaps he had expected meek gratitude, not defiance. "You agreed to present Mamaipasanin a united front in public," he reminded her. "That includes looking the part." "And what part is that exactly?" The devoted wife, the social climber who snagged Cincinnati's most eligible bachelor. "What story are we telling, Jonathan?" She infused his name with as much sarcasm as she could muster. He regarded her coolly, taking a measured sip of water. "We met at a charity auction 6 months ago. We had a whirlwind romance. We married quickly because we knew what we wanted. Simple, believable, and requires minimal elaboration. Except for the small detail that it's completely untrue. The best lies contain elements of truth," he replied. "We did meet at an auction, just not the kind the public needs to know about." With that cryptic statement, he turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway that led to his private wing of the penthouse. 2 days later, Rebecca found herself in the judge's chambers at the Hamilton County Courthouse, exchanging vows with a man who was still essentially a stranger. The ceremony was brief and devoid of all warmth, no flowers, no music, no personal promises. Just the dry, procedural language of legal matrimony. When the judge pronounced them, husband and wife, Jonathan slipped a platinum band onto her finger. Rebecca noticed something she hadn't expected. His hand trembled slightly, almost imperceptibly, as he performed this ritual act. Was it possible that beneath his icy exterior, some emotion stirred? Or was it merely distaste for the charade they were enacting? The moment passed quickly. Outside the courthouse, they posed for a single photograph for the society page of the Cincinnati Business Courier, Jonathan Blackwell and his surprise bride, before entering the waiting car. That should satisfy the public curiosity, Jonathan said as the car pulled away. My office has released a brief statement. We'll make our first public appearance next week at the firm's quarterly client reception. Rebecca nodded, twisting the unfamiliar ring on her finger. It fit perfectly, which meant he had somehow obtained her ring size without her knowledge. Just one more unsettling reminder of how thoroughly he had planned this arrangement. Why me? She asked, suddenly breaking the silence. There must be dozens of women in your social circle who would jump at the chance to be Mrs. Blackwell Strings, attached or not. Why choose someone like me? He looked at her, his expression unreadable. You needed what I offered. That made you the perfect candidate. That's not an answer. It's the only answer you require. His tone made it clear the conversation was over. The Blackwell and Associates client reception was held at the Cincinnati Club, a historic private social club in the heart of downtown. The Beaux-Arts building, with its ornate facade and grand ballroom, spoke of old money and established power, a world Rebecca had only glimpsed from the fringes of her gallery work. Jonathan guided her through the room with a possessive hand at the small of her back, introducing her to a blur of names and faces. Senior partners, major clients, judges, and politicians. She wore a fitted midnight blue gown that had been delivered that morning, along with diamond earrings that probably cost more than a year of her salary at the gallery. Smile, Jonathan murmured when they had a moment alone. You look like you're at a funeral. I'm mourning my freedom, she replied, through gritted teeth and a forced smile. A statuesque woman in her early 40s approached her red gown, a statement of confidence, her sharp eyes assessing Rebecca with unconcealed curiosity. So, this is the woman who finally captured the elusive Jonathan Blackwell, she said, her voice smooth as expensive whiskey. Victoria Hayes, senior partner. We've all been dying to meet you. Rebecca Morgan, she replied, then corrected herself. Blackwell, Rebecca Blackwell. Victoria's smile didn't reach her eyes. Morgan, any relation to Thomas Morgan, the artist? Rebecca felt Jonathan's hand tighten slightly at her waist. He was my father, she said, surprised that anyone in this crowd would know his work. How fascinating, Victoria said. I always found his work derivative, though I suppose there's a market for sentimentality in provincial galleries. The deliberate cruelty of the remark made Rebecca's breath catch. Before she could respond, an elderly man joined their circle, Harrison Wells, according to his introduction, senior founding partner of the firm. Jonathan, he said, his voice gravelly with age and authority, the River's Edge team is eager for an update. They're concerned about the community opposition. We have it handled, Harrison, Jonathan replied smoothly. In fact, my wife has connections in the arts community that may prove valuable in that regard. Rebecca shot him a questioning look, but he continued without acknowledging her confusion. The development will include a community arts space, he explained to Harrison. Rebecca's expertise will ensure it meets actual community needs rather than just checking a box for the zoning board. Harrison studied Rebecca with newfound interest. Clever, he said finally. Very clever indeed. The board votes next month, and this could tip the scales in our favor. He turned to Jonathan with a knowing smile. Now I understand the rush to the altar. As the evening continued, Rebecca pieced together fragments of conversation that revealed the River's Edge development, a massive luxury complex planned for a historic riverfront district currently occupied by small businesses and artist studios. Jonathan's firm represented the developers, and securing approval from the City Planning Commission was apparently crucial to his standing in the firm. Was this why he needed a wife to present a stable, committed image to conservative board members? To exploit her connections to the very arts community that would be displaced by the development? The questions multiplied, but answers remained elusive. By the time they returned to the penthouse, Rebecca was exhausted from the emotional strain of performing, of being paraded like an acquisition. You did well, Jonathan said as they entered the apartment, the closest thing to a compliment he had offered. Why didn't you tell me about River's Edge? She demanded. You're using me to help displace the exact community my father was part of. Something hardened in his expression. I'm not using you. I'm fulfilling my part of our agreement. Your father's debts are paid. Your house is secure. What happens at my firm is not your concern. It becomes my concern when you parade me in front of your clients as some sort of arts ambassador. Her voice rose despite her effort to maintain composure. Lower your voice, he said coldly. Francis will hear you. Let her hear me. Let the whole building hear me. You bought a wife to improve your image for a real estate deal that will destroy artist studios. Do you have any idea how that makes me feel? Feelings were not part of our agreement, he reminded her, his voice dropping to a dangerous quiet. In fact, they were specifically excluded. Rebecca stared at him, suddenly aware of how close they were standing, how the air between them seemed charged with something beyond anger, a current of awareness that made her heart beat faster. She took a deliberate step back. You're right, she said, her voice steadier. Feelings aren't part of the deal, so I won't feel anything about whatever you're planning for River's Edge. I won't feel anything at all for the next 6 months. She turned and walked to her suite, closing the door firmly behind her. Only then did she allow the tears to come silent and burning for all she had given up, for all she had yet to endure, and for the strange, unwelcome flutter she had felt standing so close to the man who now owned her life, but could never touch her heart. Morning light spilled through the floor-to-ceiling windows of the penthouse, casting long shadows across the polished concrete floors. Rebecca stood at the kitchen island, cradling a mug of coffee between her palms, watching as Cincinnati awakened below. 3 weeks had passed since she had signed away 6 months of her life, 3 weeks of careful choreography, to avoid her husband in their shared space. She had developed a routine. She rose each morning at 6 just after Jonathan left for his run. By 7, when he returned to shower and dress, she would be safely ensconced in her suite. She would emerge only after hearing the elevator doors close behind him at 8. The evenings followed a similar pattern in reverse. She would return from the gallery before he arrived home, take dinner in her room, and remain there until she was certain he had retreated to his office or bedroom. It was an existence of shadows and silence, of two lives carefully arranged to never truly intersect. Today, however, she had decided to make a small change. She placed a crystal vase of fresh peonies on the kitchen island, a splash of soft pink against the relentless gray and white of the penthouse. It was a tiny rebellion, a breath of life in the sterile environment. The elevator hummed, announcing Jonathan's return from his morning run earlier than usual. Rebecca tensed but didn't retreat. She watched as the door slid open and he stepped into the apartment, his athletic form silhouetted against the morning light. He noticed her immediately, then the flowers. His expression darkened. "What are those?" he asked, though the answer was obvious. "Flowers," Rebecca replied calmly. "Peonies, to be specific. I don't recall approving changes to the decor." Rebecca took a deliberate sip of her coffee. "They're not permanent. They'll die in about a week. Consider them temporary guests." Something flickered in his eyes, annoyance certainly, but perhaps a shadow of amusement as well. He crossed to the refrigerator, removing a bottle of water. "You have a peculiar way of interpreting our agreement. The agreement says I can't change the apartment. Flowers aren't a change, they're an addition, and a small one at that." She gestured around at the vast space. "Surely the great Jonathan Blackwell isn't threatened by a few peonies." He drank deeply from the water bottle, his eyes never leaving hers over the rim. When he lowered it, the ghost of something that might have been a smile touched his lips. "Keep them in the kitchen," he said finally, "not in the common areas." It was a small victory, but it felt monumental. Rebecca nodded, hiding her triumph behind her coffee mug. Jonathan moved toward the hallway leading to his wing, then paused. "You've been working at the gallery," he said. It wasn't a question. "3 days a week. Frances told me you wanted to know my schedule, so I've been leaving it on the refrigerator." She gestured to the neatly written note magneted to the stainless steel surface. "Is the salary sufficient if you need additional funds?" "I don't," she interrupted, a flush of pride coloring her cheeks. "The gallery pays me enough. I don't need your money beyond our arrangement." He studied her with that penetrating gaze that made her feel transparent. "Your independence is admirable. Unnecessary, but admirable." With that cryptic remark, he disappeared down the hallway, leaving Rebecca to wonder if she had just received a compliment or a criticism from the man who owned her life, but increasingly confused her heart. Over the following weeks, Rebecca continued her subtle campaign to bring life into the sterile penthouse. Fresh flowers appeared in the kitchen each Monday. A hand-woven throw in muted blues appeared draped over the back of a chair. A small, elegant ceramic bowl crafted by a local artist materialized on the entryway table to hold keys and loose change. Jonathan noticed each addition, but said nothing after their initial confrontation. Sometimes Rebecca would return to find the items rearranged, always perfectly symmetrical, always precisely placed evidence that he had touched them, considered them, and permitted their continued existence. On Saturdays, Rebecca worked the full day at Oakwood Gallery, finding solace in the familiar environment of art and creativity. The gallery owner, Olivia Parker, had become more than an employer. She was a friend and mentor, a 70-year-old former artist with a razor-sharp mind and boundless energy. "So how's married life with Cincinnati's most eligible bachelor?" Olivia asked one quiet afternoon as they hung a new exhibition. Her tone was light, but her eyes were serious behind her distinctive red-framed glasses. Rebecca carefully adjusted the painting before her buying time. "It's different than I expected." "I imagine so, considering the circumstances." At Rebecca's startled look, Olivia chuckled softly. "My dear, I've known you since you were in pigtails. You didn't fall madly in love and run off with a corporate lawyer you'd never mentioned. I'm old, not senile." Rebecca sighed, relieved to have someone who saw through the charade. "It's complicated. The best things usually are." Olivia handed her another painting. "He's helping you keep your father's house, isn't he?" Rebecca nodded, unable to explain the full arrangement. "Thomas would understand," Olivia said gently. "He did what he had to do for his art. You're doing what you must for his legacy." The simple understanding in those words brought tears to Rebecca's eyes. She blinked them away quickly, focusing on hanging the next piece perfectly level. "Speaking of your father's legacy," Olivia continued, "Daniel Reynolds stopped by yesterday asking about your father's work. He's curating a retrospective on Cincinnati artists and seems quite interested in including Thomas." Daniel Reynolds. The name was vaguely familiar. The developer turned gallery owner. The very same. Quite the rising star in the arts community. He's transformed that old warehouse in Over the Rhine into one of the most talked about gallery spaces in the Midwest. The Reynolds Gallery. Olivia adjusted her glasses. "Handsome fellow, too. Around 35, I'd say. He mentioned he'd like to meet you." Rebecca frowned. "I'm not sure that would be appropriate given my situation." "Nonsense. It's professional interest in your father's work. That's exactly what Thomas would want." Olivia's tone brooked no argument. "He's coming by next week to see some of the pieces we have on consignment. I've already told him you'd be here." Before Rebecca could protest further, the gallery door chimed, announcing customers, and the conversation ended. But the seed of discomfort had been planted. How would Jonathan react to her meeting with another man, even in a professional capacity? More troubling still, why did she care what Jonathan would think? That evening, as Rebecca entered the penthouse, she was surprised to find Jonathan in the kitchen, attempting to operate the espresso machine she had purchased the previous week. His tie was loosened, his suit jacket draped over a bar stool, signs of rare relaxation in his usually impeccable appearance. "Problem?" she asked, setting down her bag. He glanced up, frustration evident in the tight line of his mouth. "This machine requires an engineering degree." "It requires patience," she corrected, moving beside him. "Here, let me show you." She demonstrated the process, aware of his proclivity, the subtle scent of his cologne, the way he watched her hands with focused attention. When the machine produced a perfect espresso, his expression shifted to something approaching satisfaction. "Thank you," he said, taking the cup from her. The words seemed to surprise him as much as they did her. "You're welcome." She stepped back, creating distance. "I didn't expect you home this early." "Trial preparation. I needed files from my office here." He sipped the espresso, his eyebrows rising slightly at the quality. "This is good." "High praise from Jonathan Blackwell," she teased lightly. "I should record this historic moment." A sound escaped him, not quite a laugh, but close enough to startle them both. For a moment, the carefully constructed walls between them seemed to thin, allowing a glimpse of something more human beneath his controlled exterior. The moment passed quickly. Jonathan cleared his throat, setting down the empty espresso cup with precision. "We have an event tomorrow evening. The Symphony. Black tie. Francis has arranged appropriate attire for you." "The Symphony," Rebecca repeated, unexpectedly pleased. Despite everything, the chance to hear the Cincinnati Symphony Orchestra at Music Hall was enticing. "What are they performing?" "Rachmaninoff, Piano Concerto No. 2. He spoke the composer's name with unexpected familiarity. "The car will be ready at 7. With that, he collected his jacket and files, retreating to his office without another word, leaving Rebecca to wonder about the brief connection they had shared and the meaning behind his choice of music. Sunday brunch at the exclusive River Club was apparently another obligation of being Mrs. Jonathan Blackwell. Rebecca sat across from Victoria Hayes, the senior partner she had met at the client reception, and Marcus Chen, Jonathan's closest friend and the firm's technology law specialist. Jonathan had excused himself to take an important call, leaving Rebecca to navigate the social waters alone. "So, Rebecca," Victoria said, cutting her eggs Benedict with surgical precision, "Jonathan tells us you're quite the art expert. How fascinating to have an actual career beyond being Mrs. Blackwell." The condescension was thinly veiled, but Rebecca maintained her composure. "I've been fortunate to combine my passion with my profession. Yes. And how is married life treating you?" Victoria's smile was sharp as a blade. "Jonathan can be so demanding in his professional life. I've often wondered what he's like behind closed doors." The implication was clear. Victoria and Jonathan had history. Rebecca felt an unexpected flare of something that felt dangerously like jealousy. "Jonathan is exactly what I expected," she replied coolly. "Precise, methodical, thorough." Victoria's smile faltered slightly, and Marcus coughed to cover what might have been a laugh. "You've certainly had an effect on him." Marcus said, his friendly tone a welcome contrast to Victoria's barbed comments. "I've known Jonathan for 15 years, and I've never seen him leave the office before 8 until you came along." "Marcus," Victoria warned. "It's true," he continued, ignoring her. "And did you know he actually declined the Seattle deposition last week? Said he had personal commitments in Cincinnati." Marcus used air quotes, his expression incredulous. Rebecca hadn't known. The revelation that Jonathan might be adjusting his sacred work schedule because of their arrangement was unsettling. Before she could respond, Jonathan returned to the table. "Problem solved," he announced, resuming his seat. "What did I miss?" "Just getting to know your bride better," Victoria said smoothly. "She's quite unexpected." Jonathan's eyes met Rebecca's across the table, a silent communication passing between them. "Yes," he agreed, "she is." The rest of brunch passed in a blur of superficial conversation and subtle power plays. Rebecca observed the dynamics between the three colleagues with growing interest. Victoria's interest in Jonathan was obvious, as was Marcus's genuine friendship. What remained unclear was Jonathan's true relationship with either of them. As they left the club, Marcus fell into step beside Rebecca, while Jonathan spoke with the valet. "He hasn't played in years, you know," Marcus said quietly. "Played the piano. Jonathan was something of a prodigy as a kid. Could have gone professional." Marcus nodded toward Jonathan. "Did he tell you about the Chopin competition when we were at Yale? He won beat-out music majors as a pre-law student. Then he just stopped. Sold his piano. Said he didn't have time anymore." Rebecca thought of the Steinway and the penthouse gleaming and untouched. "No," she said softly. "He didn't tell me. There's a lot he doesn't tell anyone." Marcus's expression grew serious. "Whatever your arrangement is, and I know there must be one, you should know that Jonathan doesn't do anything without a reason. And the reason is rarely what it appears to be." Before she could ask what he meant, Jonathan approached, effectively ending the conversation. But Marcus's words echoed in her mind throughout the drive home. What was Jonathan's true reason for their marriage? What game was he really playing? The Cincinnati Music Hall stood magnificent against the evening sky, its Victorian Gothic architecture illuminated dramatically. Inside, the Springer Auditorium glowed with warm light, reflecting off ornate gilded details and plush red seats. Rebecca felt a rush of appreciation for the historic beauty of the space as Jonathan guided her to their box seats, with a hand lightly touching the small of her back. She wore a gown of deep emerald that Frances had indeed arranged, a couture creation that fit, as though made for her, which it probably had been. Jonathan was impeccable in his tuxedo drawing, admiring glances from women and respectful nods from men as they made their way through the crowd. They moved through the social ritual with practiced ease. Now Rebecca had learned to mirror Jonathan's formal manners, to engage in the right amount of small talk, to appear comfortable in this world of wealth and influence that remained foreign to her core. As they took their seats, Rebecca noticed Jonathan's fingers tapping silently against his program, a subtle rhythm that matched the Rachmaninoff prelude being played as the audience settled. The gesture seemed unconscious, intimate, a glimpse behind the mask. "You play," she said quietly, not a question but a gentle accusation. His fingers stilled immediately. "I did, a lifetime ago." "Why did you stop?" His expression closed, the brief vulnerability vanishing. It was impractical. The house lights dimmed before she could press further, the conductor appearing to enthusiastic applause. As the orchestra began the opening chords of Rachmaninoff's Piano Concerto No. 2, Rebecca watched Jonathan from the corner of her eye. His posture remained perfect, his expression controlled, but his eyes told a different story. The music swelled around them, the piano soloist weaving through the rich orchestral texture with passionate intensity. When the famous Adagio sostenuto movement began its achingly beautiful melody unfolding like a secret confession, Rebecca saw Jonathan close his eyes briefly, his breathing changing subtly. Without thinking, she reached across the small space between their seats and touched his hand. His fingers tensed beneath hers, but he didn't pull away. For those few transcendent minutes as Rachmaninoff's music filled the hall with longing and beauty, they were connected by something beyond their contract, beyond their carefully constructed facades. When the movement ended, Jonathan slowly withdrew his hand, but something had shifted between them. A boundary had been approached, if not crossed. The remainder of the concert passed in a heightened state of awareness, every movement, every breath between them charged with unspoken questions. When the final triumphant chords of the concerto resounded through the hall, the audience erupted in applause. Rebecca rose with the crowd, but Jonathan remained seated for a moment longer, as though reluctant to break the spell of the music. In the private space of the car, returning to the penthouse, Rebecca finally asked the question that had been building all evening. Why Rachmaninoff? The city lights played across Jonathan's face as he looked out the window, creating shadows that softened his sharp features. For a long moment, she thought he wouldn't answer. Rachmaninoff suffered from a creative block after the failure of his first symphony, he said finally, his voice low and measured. He couldn't compose for years. His second piano concerto was the piece that broke that silence. It was his redemption, his return from artistic exile. He turned to look at her directly. I've always admired that resilience. The personal significance of the admission hung in the air between them. Rebecca sensed there was more, much more to the story, but she didn't press. This small revelation felt precious, like a rare flower breaking through winter ground. As the elevator carried them to the penthouse, the silence between them hummed with tension. They stood closer than usual, not touching, but aware of each other in a way that made the small space feel charged with possibility. When the doors opened to their shared home, neither moved immediately. Jonathan, Rebecca began, not entirely sure what she wanted to say. He turned to her, and in his eyes she saw conflict, desire warring with restraint. For one breathless moment, she thought he might close the distance between them, might break his own cardinal rule. Instead, he took a deliberate step back. We should remember our agreement, he said, his voice rougher than usual. Good night, Rebecca. He disappeared into his wing of the penthouse, leaving her alone with the echo of Rachmaninoff's melodies and the unsettling realization that their carefully negotiated boundaries were becoming increasingly difficult to maintain. The Reynolds Gallery occupied a beautifully renovated 19th century warehouse in Cincinnati's historic Over-the-Rhine district. Original brick walls and wooden beams contrasted with sleek modern lighting and polished concrete floors, a space that honored its industrial past while embracing contemporary aesthetics. Rebecca had debated whether to mention the meeting to Jonathan, but ultimately decided against it. It was professional, related to her father's work, and entirely appropriate. The fact that she felt a twinge of guilt suggested she was attaching more significance to the meeting than it warranted. Daniel Reynolds greeted her with a warm smile and an enthusiastic handshake. He was undeniably attractive, tall, with sandy hair, intelligent hazel eyes, and an easy charm that contrasted sharply with Jonathan's controlled intensity. Rebecca Morgan, he said, his smile widening. Or should I say Blackwell, your wedding announcement caused quite a stir in Cincinnati's social circles. Morgan is fine for professional context, she replied, hyper-aware of how the situation might appear. I understand you're interested in my father's work for a retrospective. Straight to business, Daniel noted, with an approving nod. I like that. Yes, I'm curating an exhibition titled Cincinnati Visions, featuring local artists who captured the spirit of the city over the past 3 decades. Your father's urban landscapes from the early 2000s are exactly what I'm looking for. He led her through the gallery, describing his vision for the exhibition with genuine passion. Rebecca found herself responding to his enthusiasm, the conversation flowing easily as they discussed artistic techniques, themes, and her father's evolution as an artist. I've secured works from several private collections, Daniel explained, but I'm hoping you might consider loaning some pieces from your personal collection, particularly Suspension Bridge at Dawn. It's one of his finest works. The painting he mentioned was one of Rebecca's favorites, currently hanging in her childhood home. The thought of sharing it with a wider audience of having her father's work recognized was deeply appealing. I'd need to see more details about the exhibition, she said cautiously. Insurance, security, duration of the loan. Of course. Daniel moved to a sleek desk in the corner, retrieving a folder. I've prepared everything. I was hoping you'd be thorough. His smile was warm, appreciative. Perhaps we could discuss it over lunch. There's a new bistro around the corner that serves an excellent Sauvignon Blanc. The invitation was innocent enough on the surface, but Rebecca sensed undertones that made her uncomfortable. I'm afraid I can't today. Another time, perhaps. If Daniel was disappointed, he hid it well. Of course, take the information, review it at your leisure. As he handed her the folder, his fingers brushed hers deliberately. I have to say, Jonathan Blackwell is a lucky man. Rebecca withdrew her hand smoothly. I'll review the proposal and be in touch, Mr. Reynolds. Daniel, please. His smile remained confident. And I hope you will. Be in touch, that is. Your father's legacy deserves recognition, Rebecca. I can provide that. As she left the gallery, Rebecca couldn't shake a feeling of unease. Daniel's interest in her father's work seemed genuine, but there was something else beneath his professional demeanor, something calculating, that reminded her unexpectedly of Jonathan at his most strategic. The exhibition proposal itself was impressive, well-funded, professionally planned, with significant media coverage promised. It would indeed be a worthy showcase for her father's art. But would Jonathan object? And why did his opinion matter so much to her when this was precisely the kind of decision their agreement left in her hands? She was so absorbed in these thoughts that she didn't notice the black Audi parked across the street or the familiar figure watching her exit the gallery with a darkening expression. That evening, Jonathan returned to the penthouse earlier than usual. Rebecca was in the kitchen preparing tea, having spent the afternoon at her father's house checking on the property and selecting paintings that might be appropriate for Daniel's exhibition. Jonathan's entrance was abrupt, his energy tightly coiled as he strode into the kitchen. You met with Daniel Reynolds today. It wasn't a question. Rebecca set down her teacup slowly. Yes, he's interested in including my father's work in an upcoming exhibition. And you didn't think to mention this meeting to me? The accusation in his tone sparked her defiance. I didn't realize I needed your permission to discuss my father's art. That wasn't part of our agreement. Our agreement includes presenting a united front. That becomes difficult when my wife is seen having private meetings with other men. It was a professional meeting in a public gallery at 11 in the morning, Rebecca countered, her voice rising. Hardly the stuff of scandal. Jonathan's jaw tightened. Daniel Reynolds isn't just any gallery owner. He's involved with the River's Edge development on the opposition side. He's actively working to block the project. This was news to Rebecca. He didn't mention River's Edge to me. Of course not. He wouldn't reveal his true intentions so quickly. Jonathan moved closer, his presence filling the kitchen. He's using you to get to me. Not everything is about you, Jonathan, Rebecca said, struggling to maintain her composure. This is about my father's work, his legacy, something I'd think you'd understand given your secret art collection. Jonathan froze. What are you talking about? I've seen the storage receipts, Rebecca admitted. They were mixed in with the house paperwork. You've been collecting my father's paintings for years. Why? The question hung between them, charged with implications neither was ready to confront. Jonathan's expression became unreadable, his defense mechanisms visibly engaging. That's not relevant to the current situation, he said finally. What matters is that Daniel Reynolds has an agenda that extends beyond your father's art. He's using the emotional appeal of the exhibition to manipulate you. And you're not manipulating me. The words escaped before she could stop them, raw with the frustration of weeks spent walking on emotional eggshells. At least he's offering to showcase my father's work publicly, not hide it away in storage units. Something dangerous flashed in Jonathan's eyes. Is that what you think I've been doing? Hiding his work? You know nothing about my reasons. Then tell me, Rebecca challenged, stepping closer to him. Tell me why the great Jonathan Blackwell secretly bought paintings from a struggling artist for years. Tell me why you really orchestrated this marriage. Because I'm beginning to think there's much more to this arrangement than you've admitted. For a moment, the mask slipped. Something vulnerable and pain crossed Jonathan's features before his control reasserted itself. My reasons are my own, just as your father's reasons for creating art, despite its impracticality, were his own. The comparison startled her. Before she could respond, Jonathan continued, his voice colder now. If you want to loan paintings to Reynolds' exhibition, that's your prerogative. But be aware that he will use your involvement, and by extension, my connection to you, to further his agenda against River's Edge. And if that happens, Rebecca asked quietly, if your precious development is delayed because of my decision, Jonathan's expression hardened, then we will have to reevaluate our arrangement. The threat was implicit but clear. Rebecca felt a chill that had nothing to do with the penthouse's perfect climate control. I see. So my freedom is conditional on supporting your business interests even when they might conflict with my father's legacy. That was always the nature of our agreement, Jonathan replied, a business arrangement with mutual benefits and clear boundaries. He stepped back, creating physical distance that mirrored the emotional chasm widening between them. I have work to finish. Good night, Rebecca. As he turned to leave, Rebecca called after him. The exhibition opening would be next month. Will you attend with me as my husband, regardless of your personal feelings about Daniel Reynolds? Jonathan paused but didn't turn around. I will fulfill my obligations under our agreement, as I expect you to fulfill yours. With that cryptic statement, he disappeared into his office, leaving Rebecca to wonder if she had just won a small victory or made a terrible mistake. The boundaries between them, once so clearly defined, were becoming increasingly blurred. What had begun as a simple transaction was evolving into something far more complex and dangerous to her heart. 2 weeks passed in a strained détente. Rebecca continued her work at the gallery, carefully reviewing Daniel's exhibition proposal while maintaining a professional distance from the man himself. Jonathan buried himself in preparation for the River's Edge Zoning Board hearing, often not returning to the penthouse until long after Rebecca had retired to her room. When they did occupy the same space, their interactions were polite but guarded, neither willing to revisit the tension of their confrontation. Yet something had changed. Rebecca caught Jonathan watching her sometimes with an expression she couldn't decipher, and she found herself increasingly aware of his presence, his movements, the rare sounds of his laughter when Marcus visited. It was as if their argument had cracked the carefully constructed walls between them, allowing glimpses of the real people behind their contractual roles. These glimpses were both fascinating and frightening, hinting at complexities neither had anticipated when they signed their agreement. On a stormy Thursday evening, Rebecca returned to the penthouse earlier than usual. The gallery had closed due to a power outage caused by the severe thunderstorm raging across Cincinnati. The penthouse's emergency generator hummed quietly, keeping essential systems running, despite the blackout affecting parts of the city below. The apartment was dim-lit only by security lights and the dramatic flashes of lightning through the wall of windows. Rebecca moved through the space, carefully wondering if Jonathan was home or still at his office downtown. A sound from the kitchen drew her attention, a soft thud, followed by a muttered curse. She rounded the corner to find Jonathan rummaging through a drawer, a flashlight beam bobbing as he searched. Looking for something, she asked. He straightened quickly, turning the flashlight away from her eyes. Candles. Francis usually keeps them in here for emergencies. Second drawer on the left, Rebecca said, having reorganized the kitchen weeks ago. Behind the serving utensils. Jonathan located them with her direction, extracting several pillar candles and a book of matches. Thank you. He hesitated, then added, the storm is expected to continue through the night. The generator should maintain essential power, but it's limited. Rebecca recognized the information as his version of concern. I'll be fine. I have a book I can read by candlelight. As if punctuating her statement, a tremendous crack of thunder shook the building, followed by a brilliant flash of lightning that illuminated the entire penthouse for a split second. In that frozen moment of harsh light, Rebecca saw something she hadn't noticed before: a small, ornate key sitting on the counter beside Jonathan's wallet and phone. When darkness returned, broken only by the flashlight beam, the image remained etched in her mind. She recognized that key. It matched the antique secretary desk in the corner of Jonathan's home office, the one room she had been explicitly forbidden to enter. Jonathan gathered the candles, apparently not noticing her sudden interest. I'll be working in my office if you need anything. Of course, Rebecca replied, keeping her voice casual. Stay safe. After he left, she approached the counter slowly. The keys still lay there, overlooked in Jonathan's search for emergency supplies. Her fingers hovered over it, her conscience battling with growing curiosity. What secrets did Jonathan Blackwell keep locked away? What might she discover about the man who had bought her life, but remained a stranger? The thunder crashed again, louder this time, rattling the windows and sending shadows dancing across the walls. It felt like a warning or perhaps an invitation. Before she could reconsider, Rebecca picked up the key and slipped it into her pocket, her heart racing with a mixture of fear and anticipation. Some doors once unlocked could never be closed again. The storm raged outside, lashing rain against the windows of the penthouse, while lightning illuminated the Cincinnati skyline in stark electric flashes. Rebecca stood in the hallway outside Jonathan's office, the antique key heavy in her palm. The power remained out in most of the building, with only emergency generators keeping essential systems running. The penthouse was bathed in shadows, broken occasionally by the glow of candles Jonathan had placed in strategic locations. She knew he had retreated to his bedroom wing after working in his office. The penthouse was silent, save for the rumble of thunder and the persistent drumming of rain. This might be her only opportunity to discover what Jonathan Blackwell kept hidden behind his carefully constructed walls. Her conscience warred with her curiosity. Using the key would be a violation of their agreement, an intrusion into the private space he had explicitly forbidden. Yet something deeper than mere curiosity drove her. In the weeks they had lived as strangers, sharing a home, she had glimpsed fragments of a man far more complex than the cold attorney who had purchased 6 months of her life. The Rachmaninoff concert, the hidden collection of her father's artwork, the antique Steinway piano that stood silent but maintained with reverent care, all suggested depths Jonathan worked tirelessly to conceal. The key slipped into the lock with a soft click. Rebecca hesitated, knowing that crossing this threshold might forever alter whatever fragile understanding existed between them. Then, summoning her courage, she turned the key and opened the door. The office was as meticulously organized as she had expected, law books arranged by subject and author files stacked with mathematical precision, a desk clear of all but a laptop and legal pad. But it was what stood against the far wall that stole her breath. A door, almost invisible when closed, stood ajar. Beyond it lay a room she had never known existed, a studio bathed in the soft glow of emergency lighting. Rebecca stepped forward in a trance, drawn by what the subdued light revealed. Canvases, dozens of them, some finished, some in progress, all bearing the unmistakable style of someone trained in classical techniques, but with a modern sensibility. In one corner stood an easel with a half-completed portrait, a woman with silver hair and proud features that Rebecca recognized as Elizabeth Blackwell, Jonathan's mother, though portrayed with a gentleness that seemed at odds with the formidable woman Rebecca had met. Art supplies were arranged with the same precision Jonathan brought to every aspect of his life. Brushes cleaned and organized by sheet paints, grouped by color family palettes, scrubbed clean. This was not the space of a dilettante, but of a serious artist who approached his craft with discipline and devotion. Rebecca moved through the studio in wonder, taking in landscapes of Cincinnati seen from unusual perspectives, studies of human forms that captured both physical detail and emotional essence, abstract pieces that conveyed complex feelings through color and composition. The work was remarkable, technically accomplished, but also infused with genuine feeling. On a small table near the window lay a sketchbook. Rebecca knew she should stop, that she had already violated Jonathan's privacy enough, but her hands seemed to move of their own accord. She opened the book and found herself looking at a series of sketches of herself, her at the gallery reception, where they had first appeared as a couple, her profile illuminated by candlelight, her standing at the penthouse windows looking out over the city, her lost in thought arranging flowers in the kitchen. Each drawing captured not just her physical appearance, but something more essential, her determination, her quiet grief for her father, her stubborn hope. Find what you're looking for. The voice from the doorway made her heart freeze. She turned to find Jonathan standing there, his face in shadow, his body a dark silhouette against the dim hallway light. Jonathan, save your explanations. His voice was low, controlled, but with an undercurrent of fury that made her shiver. You've clearly decided our agreement means nothing. Oh, that's not fair, she protested, closing the sketchbook. You've kept secrets too. These paintings, my father's collection, which gave you the right to invade my privacy. He stepped into the studio, and in the faint light, she could see his face now pale with anger, his eyes like ice. This room was the one place that was mine alone. The betrayal in his voice struck her more deeply than his anger. I'm sorry, she said quietly, but I don't understand. These works are extraordinary, Jonathan. Why hide them? Why pretend this part of you doesn't exist? Something shifted in his expression, anger giving way to something more complex, more vulnerable. Because it doesn't exist, not in my real life. He moved past her to stand before the unfinished portrait of his mother. Art is a luxury I can't afford. That's absurd, Rebecca said. You can afford anything. Not everything has a price tag, Rebecca. He turned to her, and in that moment, he seemed stripped of his usual armor, raw and exposed. My mother worked 3 jobs after my father left. She sacrificed everything so I could have stability, security, a life he couldn't provide with his artistic career. The bitterness in the final word was palpable. Understanding dawned. Your father was an artist. Jonathan's laugh was hollow. A jazz pianist who thought talent excused irresponsibility. He left when I was 10, chose his music over his family. My mother made sure I understood the lesson: art is self-indulgence. Success requires discipline, practicality. He gestured around the studio. This is my weakness, my failure to fully become what she needed me to be. The confession hung in the air between them, more intimate than any physical touch could have been. Rebecca saw Jonathan Blackwell clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the calculated businessman, not the secret artist, but the boy caught between worlds trying to reconcile opposing parts of himself. It's not weakness to be whole, she said softly, to honor all the parts of yourself. Spoken like someone who never had to choose, he replied, but without rancor. He moved to a canvas covered with a cloth, hesitated, then pulled the covering away. I met your father once at a small exhibition in 2010. I was there representing a client who collected contemporary art. Rebecca stepped closer, recognition flooding her as she saw the painting, a Cincinnati cityscape at dusk, that had been one of her father's favorites. You bought this directly from him. Jonathan nodded. He saw me sketching in a corner. Most people ignored me, the lawyer in the expensive suit, playing at being an artist. Your father didn't. He looked at my work and said I had the gift of seeing beyond surfaces. His voice softened with the memory. We talked for hours. He encouraged me to pursue art seriously. I told him my circumstances made that impossible. So you bought his painting instead, Rebecca finished. The first of many, Jonathan admitted. I followed his career quietly, purchased his work through intermediaries. Not as investments, though they were that too, but because his vision spoke to me, reminded me of possibilities I couldn't pursue. A piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Is that why you approached me after his death? Some sort of artistic debt you felt you owed him? Jonathan's expression closed slightly. It was one factor among many. He turned away, beginning to replace the cloth over the painting. Rebecca caught his wrist gently. Don't hide it, or any of these. They deserve to be seen, Jonathan. The touch between them was electric, charged with all the unacknowledged tension of weeks living in careful separation. Jonathan looked down at her hand on his wrist, then slowly raised his eyes to meet hers. The mask had fallen completely now, leaving his face vulnerable, uncertain. If my mother saw this place, knew how much time I still devoted to this indulgence, he couldn't finish. She'd see her son as exceptional in more ways than one, Rebecca said firmly. The same drive that makes you a brilliant attorney makes these paintings extraordinary. You don't have to choose between worlds, Jonathan. Something shifted in his expression, a softening, a warming of those ice blue eyes. For a breathless moment, Rebecca thought he might bridge the careful distance they had maintained. The rules of their arrangement seemed suddenly insubstantial compared to the connection forming between them. Thunder crashed outside, startling them both. Jonathan stepped back, the moment broken. It's late, he said, his voice regaining some of its customary control. We should both get some rest. Rebecca nodded, recognizing his retreat, but sensing it was different now. Not a rejection, but a pause, a chance to process what had been revealed between them. As she turned to leave the studio, Jonathan spoke again. Rebecca, she looked back. Thank you for seeing beyond surfaces. The echo of her father's words wasn't lost on her. She smiled gently. Good night, Jonathan. As she closed the door behind her, Rebecca knew their agreement had fundamentally changed. The lines they had drawn so carefully were blurring, the transaction evolving into something neither had anticipated. Whether that was dangerous or liberating remained to be seen. The next morning dawned clear and bright, the storm having washed the city clean overnight. Rebecca found Jonathan in the kitchen making coffee with the machine she had taught him to use. He wore casual closed jeans and a simple button-down shirt attire she had never seen him in before. Good morning, he said, his tone carefully neutral, though something in his eyes had changed. Good morning. She accepted the cup he offered, their fingers brushing briefly. About last night, I have something to show you, he interrupted, not unkindly, if you are free today. Surprised by the unexpected invitation, Rebecca nodded. I am. Good, we'll leave in an hour. He offered no further explanation, and Rebecca didn't press. The night's revelations had established a fragile new trust between them, and she sensed that whatever Jonathan planned was significant to him. They drove through Cincinnati in comfortable silence, Jonathan behind the wheel of his Audi, rather than using the usual driver. He navigated away from downtown through neighborhoods transitioning from urban to suburban, finally pulling up before a modest building in a mixed-use area of Oakley. A discreet sign above the entrance read, Morgan Foundation for Young Artists. Rebecca turned to him in confusion. Morgan Foundation, I don't understand. Jonathan's expression was uncharacteristically uncertain. After meeting your father, I wanted to help aspiring artists who might face the same financial barriers I did. Using my name wasn't an option for obvious reasons. Your father's seemed appropriate. Stunned, Rebecca followed him inside. The space was simple but thoughtfully designed, a small gallery showcasing student work studios with natural light classrooms equipped with quality materials. A young woman greeted Jonathan with obvious familiarity. Mr. Blackwell, we weren't expecting you today. The new students from Washington Park Middle School are settling in well. Their first exhibition is scheduled for next month. Thank you, Sarah. This is Rebecca Mo Blackwell. He corrected himself. The name change still awkward on his tongue. She'll be touring the facility today. Please show her everything. As Sarah led Rebecca through the foundation, explaining their programs for underprivileged youth interested in art, Jonathan remained slightly apart, watching Rebecca's reactions rather than the tour itself. Each room revealed another dimension of the foundation's work: scholarships, mentorship programs, community exhibitions, all operated quietly but effectively for years. How many students have benefited from this? Rebecca asked as they completed the tour. Sarah beamed. Over 300 since we opened 5 years ago. 17 have gone on to art school with full scholarships. When they were alone again, Rebecca turned to Jonathan, overwhelmed. You created all this in my father's name. Why didn't you tell me? He looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. It wasn't relevant to our arrangement. Not relevant, she gestured around them. Jonathan, this is extraordinary. These children have opportunities my father could only have dreamed of, that you must have dreamed of. He shrugged, though she could see her words affected him. Your father's encouragement meant something to me. This seemed an appropriate way to honor that. Rebecca studied him, this complex man who presented one face to the world while quietly creating beauty and opportunity through both his art and philanthropy. Does your mother know about the foundation? His expression tightened. No, and she can't find out. The foundation operates through a series of trusts that can't be connected to me personally. If she knew I was encouraging young people to pursue art as a career. You're still trying to please her, Rebecca observed gently. After all these years. Jonathan's jaw worked as he struggled with emotions he rarely allowed himself to acknowledge. She sacrificed everything for me, her happiness, her own dreams. How can I dishonor that sacrifice by indulging in the very thing that destroyed our family? By hiding your true self, you're sacrificing your happiness, Rebecca said. Don't you think that would break her heart if she really understood? He had no answer for that, and they drove back to the penthouse in thoughtful silence. But something fundamental had shifted between them. The walls Jonathan had built so carefully were crumbling, revealing the complex, contradictory man behind the perfect facade. And Rebecca found herself increasingly drawn to that real man, regardless of the conditions of their agreement. The next 2 weeks brought a subtle transformation to their relationship. They no longer avoided each other in the penthouse, instead sharing morning coffee and occasional dinners. Jonathan worked from home more often, sometimes leaving his office door open while Rebecca read or sketched in the living area. They didn't discuss his art studio or the foundation again directly, but the knowledge of these shared secrets created an intimacy that neither acknowledged openly. One evening as they sat in the living room after dinner, Jonathan reviewing legal documents, Rebecca cataloging paintings for Daniel Reynolds' exhibition, the comfortable silence was broken by the chime of the elevator. Elizabeth Blackwell stepped into the penthouse elegant as ever in a tailored suit despite the late hour. Her silver hair was swept into a perfect chignon, her posture regal, her expression coolly assessing as she took in the domestic scene before her. "Mother," Jonathan said, rising quickly, "we weren't expecting you." "Clearly," Elizabeth replied, her gaze moving from Jonathan's casual attire to Rebecca's relaxed posture on the sofa. "I tried calling, but you didn't answer." "Most unlike you, Jonathan." Rebecca stood smoothing her simple dress. "Mrs. Blackwell, it's nice to see you again. Can I offer you anything? Tea, perhaps?" Elizabeth's smile was polite but remote. "No, thank you, Rebecca. I won't be staying long. I simply needed to speak with my son about the River's Edge hearing tomorrow." Her attention returned to Jonathan. "Harrison called. There are concerns about the community opposition." Jonathan's expression shifted subtly, the relaxed man of moments ago replaced by the focused attorney. "The legal position is solid, Mother. The zoning board has no grounds for denial." "Legal positions don't account for public sentiment," Elizabeth countered. "The neighborhood coalition has been quite effective at generating negative publicity. That gallery owner in particular, Reynolds, has turned it into a crusade about artistic heritage and community preservation." Rebecca stiffened at the mention of Daniel, especially given her involvement with his upcoming exhibition. She felt Elizabeth's sharp eyes notice her reaction. "Perhaps your wife could be of assistance," Elizabeth suggested, "given her connections to the arts community." Jonathan's jaw tightened. "Rebecca's involvement won't be necessary." "No." Elizabeth raised a perfectly sculpted eyebrow. "I would think a united front from the Blackwell family would be quite persuasive, especially if Mrs. Blackwell were to speak about the economic benefits the development would bring to local artists." Rebecca found her voice. "I'm not sure I can, in good conscience, support a development that would displace current artists' studios and galleries, Mrs. Blackwell." The temperature in the room seemed to drop several degrees. Elizabeth studied Rebecca with new interest. "Conscience," she repeated, as if examining a foreign concept. "How inconvenient in business matters." She turned back to Jonathan. "I see your wife maintains her independence despite your arrangement." The implication was clear. Elizabeth knew their marriage was not conventional. Jonathan moved to stand beside Rebecca, a gesture of solidarity that surprised both women. "Rebecca's values were never part of our agreement, Mother," he said firmly. Elizabeth's expression hardened. "Everything is part of the agreement when the Blackwell name is involved, Jonathan. You taught me that." She collected her purse. "The hearing is at 10. I expect you will be thoroughly prepared regardless of where your wife's sympathies lie." Her gaze swept over them both. "Good evening." After she departed, the tension in the room remained palpable. Jonathan poured himself a scotch, his movements precise, but with an underlying agitation. "She knows," Rebecca said quietly, "about our arrangement." Jonathan nodded. "My mother has resources, private investigators' connections. I'm not surprised." "Does it bother you that she disapproves?" He gave a humorless laugh. "My mother's approval has always been conditional on perfect compliance with her expectations." He took a long sip of scotch. "I've spent my life trying to meet those expectations. Sometimes I wonder if anyone could." Rebecca moved closer to him, drawn by the rare vulnerability in his voice. "The River's Edge development means a lot to her." "It would cement our firm's reputation nationally," Jonathan confirmed. "The client is one of the largest developers in the country. Success would mean expansion, new offices in Chicago, New York." "Is that what you want?" He looked at her, really looked at her, as if seeing past all pretenses. "It's what's expected." The simple honesty of his answer touched her deeply. On impulse, she reached out, taking his free hand in hers. His fingers were cool against her palm, but they curled around hers with surprising gentleness. "What if," she said carefully, There was a compromise, a way to move forward with the development while preserving space for the artistic community. Jonathan studied her, something new kindling in his eyes. What are you suggesting? A dedicated portion of the development, reserved for artists' studios and galleries with subsidized rent. Community spaces for exhibitions and classes. Her mind raced with possibilities. Like your foundation, but integrated into the new development. A true arts district within River's Edge. The investors would resist the reduced profitability, he said, but she could tell he was considering it. Present it as a marketing advantage. Cultural cash increases property values in the surrounding areas. Plus, the positive publicity would counter the current opposition. She squeezed his hand. It could transform River's Edge from a controversy to a model of progressive development. Jonathan set down his glass, his other hand coming up to cradle hers between both of his. The touch was gentle but electric, sending warmth up her arms. "You're remarkable," he said softly. "Do you know that—" The admiration in his voice made her heart flutter traitorously. This was dangerous territory, far beyond the boundaries they had established. Yet neither moved away. "Will you help me?" he asked. "Draft this compromise proposal. Present it at tomorrow's hearing." "As your wife," she questioned. "As my partner," he corrected. "In this at least." The distinction felt significant, a redefinition of their relationship that acknowledged something evolving between them. Rebecca nodded, knowing they were crossing a line, but unable to refuse this chance to bridge Jonathan's divided worlds and perhaps their divided hearts. They worked through the night, Jonathan bringing his legal expertise, Rebecca contributing her knowledge of the arts community's needs. By dawn, they had created a comprehensive proposal that preserved the economic viability of River's Edge while incorporating substantial concessions to the artistic community. As the morning light filtered through the penthouse windows, they sat surrounded by documents, tired but united by a shared vision. The zoning board hearing was held in City Hall's grand chamber, the ornate room packed with developers, community activists, media, and curious citizens. Rebecca sat in the front row as Jonathan presented their proposal with passionate precision. She watched in fascination as he transformed her artistic concepts into legally sound provisions, never once diminishing their importance or treating them as mere concessions. When Daniel Reynolds rose to speak for the opposition, his expression registered clear surprise at the revised plan. His prepared arguments against corporate greed and community destruction faltered in the face of Jonathan's comprehensive compromise. The River's Edge Arts District would guarantee permanent, affordable space for the very artists and galleries we've been fighting to protect, Jonathan concluded. This isn't about replacing culture with commerce. It's about creating a sustainable partnership between them. He turned, extending his hand toward Rebecca. My wife, Rebecca Morgan Blackwell, has been instrumental in developing this vision. As a respected member of Cincinnati's arts community and daughter of celebrated local artist Thomas Morgan, she understands what's truly at stake for both sides. Rebecca hadn't expected to speak, but as she rose to join Jonathan at the podium, she felt a surety of purpose. This was a chance to honor her father's legacy while helping create something meaningful for future artists. She spoke from the heart about the challenges artists faced finding affordable studio space, the importance of community support, and her belief that the revised River's Edge plan represented a rare opportunity for genuine collaboration between business and artistic interests. My father used to say that art thrives at intersections between tradition and innovation, between solitude and community, between commerce and creativity, she concluded. The River's Edge Arts District could be such an intersection, a place where different worlds meet and create something greater than either could achieve alone. When she finished, the room erupted in applause. Even Daniel Reynolds nodded reluctantly, recognizing that the compromise offered more than his opposition had hoped to achieve. Elizabeth Blackwell, seated with the development team, studied Rebecca with new consideration in her gaze. The board voted unanimously to approve the revised plan. Outside City Hall, reporters surrounded Jonathan and Rebecca, asking questions about the unexpected compromise. They answered as a united team, their responses complementing each other naturally. When a photographer asked them to pose together, Jonathan slipped his arm around Rebecca's waist, drawing her close against his side. The gesture felt both protective and possessive, and she leaned into him without thinking. "You were magnificent," he murmured, as they walked toward the waiting car, his mouth close to her ear. I couldn't have done this without you. The simple acknowledgement meant more than any elaborate praise. For perhaps the first time they had functioned as true partners, each bringing their strengths to create something neither could have achieved alone. That evening, the penthouse was transformed by dozens of candles and the delicious aromas of a celebration dinner prepared by Francis. A bottle of champagne chilled in an ice bucket and soft jazz played in the background. Rebecca emerged from her room in a simple black dress to find Jonathan waiting, jacket discarded tie, loosened a rare smile softening his features. "What's all this?" she asked, gesturing to the elegant table setting. "A thank you," he said, pouring champagne into two flutes. "For today. For everything, really." He handed her a glass, their fingers brushing in a touch that no longer seemed accidental. They toasted silently, eyes holding each other's gaze over the rims of their glasses. Dinner was intimate and relaxed, their conversation flowing easily between discussions of the arts district's potential and more personal exchanges. Jonathan spoke of his law school days, his friendship with Marcus, his love of sailing on Lake Michigan during rare moments of leisure. Rebecca shared stories of growing up surrounded by artists, her college years studying art history, her dreams of someday opening her own gallery focused on overlooked local talent. As Francis served dessert, a delicate chocolate souffle, Jonathan grew more serious. "There's something I need to tell you about the foundation," he said. "Something I should have explained before." Rebecca set down her fork, giving him her full attention. "The Morgan Foundation wasn't just named in honor of your father," he continued. "When I learned of his illness 3 years ago, I approached him directly, offered financial assistance for his medical treatments." Rebecca's breath caught. "You knew my father was sick before he died." Jonathan nodded. "He refused direct help, said he wouldn't take charity, but he did agree to sell me several major paintings at above market value on the condition that the proceeds be used to establish the foundation. He wanted to create something lasting for young artists facing financial barriers." Tears welled in Rebecca's eyes as she absorbed this revelation. "He never told me." "He made me promise not to," Jonathan said gently. "He was proud, Rebecca. He didn't want you to know he was worried about leaving you with his debts." "So you knew about me," she whispered, "before my father died." Jonathan's expression softened. "I knew of you. Thomas spoke of you often with immense pride. When he passed and I learned of the foreclosure threat, I felt responsible. The arrangement I proposed seemed the most efficient solution." "Efficient," Rebecca repeated the word hanging between them. "Is that all it was?" His eyes held hers across the candlelight. "Initially," he admitted, "and then it became something else, something I hadn't anticipated." The confession hung in the air, unfinished but unmistakable. They had moved far beyond their original arrangement into territory neither had mapped. The boundaries they had established seemed increasingly irrelevant in the face of the connection growing between them. Francis discreetly removed their dessert plates and bid them good night, leaving Jonathan and Rebecca alone in the candlelit penthouse. A new song began playing softly, Gershwin's Summertime, performed as a piano solo. Jonathan rose, extending his hand to Rebecca. "Dance with me." The request was so unexpected, so unlike the controlled attorney she had first met, that she found herself standing before she had consciously decided to accept. His arms encircled her waist as hers found their way around his neck. They moved together slowly, the music washing over them as the city lights twinkled beyond the windows. "This breaks our agreement," Rebecca murmured, though she made no move to step away. "I think we've been breaking it for some time," Jonathan replied, his voice low near her ear. "Perhaps it needs to be renegotiated." His hand, at the small of her back, drew her imperceptibly closer. Rebecca could feel the steady beat of his heart against her chest, his breath warm against her hair. The careful distance they had maintained for months had dwindled to nothing. "Jonathan," she whispered, looking up at him. His eyes, usually so guarded, were open to her, now revealing a depth of emotion she had only glimpsed before. His hand came up to cradle her cheek with infinite tenderness. "I never expected you," he said softly. "I never expected to feel this way." As the music swelled around them, Jonathan lowered his head slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, to maintain the boundaries of their agreement. Rebecca rose on her toes to meet him, her heart racing as their lips finally met in a kiss that felt both inevitable and revolutionary. The contact was gentle, at first tentative, as if they were both afraid this new reality might shatter if rushed. Then Rebecca's fingers slid into his hair. Jonathan's arm tightened around her waist, and the kiss deepened into something urgent and honest, a confession neither could have put into words. When they finally parted breathless, the world seemed fundamentally altered. The contract that had defined their relationship lay in metaphorical tatters around them, replaced by something far more complicated and far more real. "What happens now?" Rebecca asked, still held close in his arms. Jonathan touched his forehead to hers, his expression revealing a vulnerability she had never seen before. "I don't know," he admitted. "This wasn't in my carefully constructed plan." She smiled, her hand resting over his heart. "Perhaps it's time to create something new together." His answer was another kiss deeper and more certain than the first. Whatever came next, they both understood that their transaction had evolved into something neither had bargained for, but both now treasured a connection that transcended contracts and conditions, a partnership of hearts as well as names. Outside, the Cincinnati skyline glittered like stars fallen to earth, witnessing the transformation of a marriage of convenience into something true and lasting. Within the penthouse that had once felt like a beautiful prison, two people who had begun as strangers found themselves becoming, against all odds and agreements, a family.